I think when people sort of like think about digital future-proofing, everybody talks about like AI and like machine learning and like robotics, even though robotics is just like automation, and there's a whole lot of confusion around the workplace. And then there's anxiety that sets in. People think, geez, you're going to take away our jobs. What are we going to do? There's already not enough employment in the country, right? And at RMB, I think we like to have a different approach to that. So essentially what we're saying is like, if you look at a person's job, right, it's similar to your nervous system. So a corporate has its own nervous system, and so does a human. Now, if you think about, if you were to touch a hot stove, you'd immediately pull away, because otherwise you'd be burnt. But how did you know you had to pull away? Because your skin told you it was hot, told your brain to pull away for safety. Right now, I don't know how many people here are from corporate institutions, but if you're trying to get an annual budget, it's going to take a little bit more time than an instant, right? So imagine if you were operating as a human being at the pace of a corporate, getting information through to like your central nervous system. How would you operate? I mean, you would be walking into walls and cars all the time, right? So we recognize that what you need to do is you need to start connecting every point of your corporate ecosystem. You dataize that, you electronify it, and then you can start sending signals, right? What here represents is, if you just look at the skeleton over there, we've got, okay, well, you've got kind of like the front office banking side, and that's your typical transactors, right? The guys who go see clients, they structure deals, they work out complex solutions for clients, but then all the way down to like your architecture, and that's like, okay, well, what kind of tech stack are you using? What kind of data repository are you using? But the difference now is, if you're a front office transactor, you don't even know who your architect is. You don't even know who's working on the data side. You don't know who your human capital partners are. So why don't you know that? Because you're not connected, right? So our primary focus as a start, I would say, in the digital landscape, is to make sure that at every point in time in our organization, we remain connected. We build out the tools and the abilities and the platforms to enable that connection. Another thing that's like really important for, I think, people to understand is that investment banking and retail banking are fundamentally different. Retail banking space is a lot closer to consumers, and therefore is a lot more product-led. Would you like a new home loan? Would you like insurance? Would you like car cover? Would you like an extra credit card? Kind of like a 2-3 stage process. In investment banking, you're dealing with corporates and corporate action, which is very, very complex in themselves, a complex mix of an organization, right? So in order to separate those businesses, you need to understand depth, and that one sort of like company is a product company. Another sort of company is actually an IP company. And where does IP come from? It comes from our staff. Now, that all makes sense up until the point you say, but hold on, if all of your IP sits in your staff, and staff are not trees, they can just stand up, walk out, move to another country, you've got a problem, right? Especially, sort of like given the current economic landscape, political landscape, you just never know what might drive change. Might not be another competitive bank, it might just be a different lifestyle, right? So what we're showing there is like currently you have all this intellectual capital sitting in people, and that's fine, but theoretically that intellectual capital doesn't just belong to the individual, it belongs to the organization. Now, how do we start bringing that sort of like knowledge back into the organization, and you can distribute it properly? In terms of our approach on how do we building tools that enable our deal makers, our transactors, we take a tablet first, mobile first approach. We all know that gone are the days where you sit at a desktop and you sort of like log into something and you work, right? I mean, that's like, I think, phase 0.1. The next phase was laptops, but why did people use laptops over desktop? Because they were more portable. But then it's not that portable anymore, right? For some reason, as technology advances, your arm strength decreases and everything just feels too heavy, and you want something that's thinner, lighter, smaller, more powerful, right? If you take a look at our boardrooms, I would say even 5 years ago, you'd look at board packs this thick, right? Whole day meetings this thick. Nowadays, I'd be surprised if you even printed one pack. Most people are on iPads, Surface tablets, the works, right? So what's also important to understand is technology and digitization and future-proofing is also a lifestyle change. It's not just robots and AI and tech, right? Let's move to the next slide. I think the one big failing we've had previously is thinking about employee experience versus client experience. So we pay employees and clients pay us. So therefore, you naturally think, okay, I'm a service clients a lot better than we service employees. But what we've realized is that, well, employees are the people servicing those clients. So you actually need to start with your employee experience and empower them to deliver a good client experience. Right? Does anyone in the audience know what building this is? No. So this building is the Baha'i Temple of South America. It's built in Santiago, Chile, sort of off the base of the Andes. And it won the 2017 Architecture Innovation Award. And what's important about this is whatever you're building needs to communicate emotion, right? Like nobody logs into Excel because they like it or it's pretty, you know? You're like, geez, I can't wait to get back into Excel, you know? So that never happens, right? But why doesn't it happen? Right? Why do people check like Instagram and Facebook every day? The user experience is fantastic. Then why is our work environment user experience so terrible, right? So this building, what we're trying to encapsulate here is not only do you need to design for emotion, but you need to plan and design with purpose. This building here took 14 years to complete, right? The marble that they're using is see-through Portuguese marble, and they actually developed new glass that they cast to wrap the outside. So when the light hits it on the outside, it actually penetrates into the inside to create warmth, right? Now that takes a lot of thought and planning. It's not just a few sort of like frontline business unit heads telling some IT guys on the side, hey, listen, you must build something for me that works, you know? There's a complete disconnect there. And there's if you look at like what's happening in the wider group in terms of like the F&B experience as well as the first round experience, we are trying to closer align employee experience with client experience. It just doesn't make sense to delineate the two. Next slide. And how are we doing that, right? So previously, we only hired very, let's say, specialized people with strong quantitative backgrounds. I myself studied at WITS, I'm a WITSy, and I studied actuarial science. Right, there's a whole, you know, sort of troop of CAs floating out there, a few sort of like other engineers and things. And the problem with that is like, you know, diversity is not just sort of in skin color or sex or whatever other metric. It's in training, right? So if you take two people and you put them in the same school for 12 years and then into a different university or the same university for another 5 years, then into the same job rotation for 3 years, it's likely that they'll think similarly, right? Because they've had similar experiences. So we've sort of over the years run something we call the Class Off program, where we pick different industry professionals, we bring them in. That's had some successes. But what I think the next phase is for people to really invest the time to reskill themselves. So the two men up here, most of you will know the person on the right. I don't know if anybody knows the person on the left. Leonardo da Vinci. Right. Now, what's common about these two gentlemen is that they were both polymaths. So they not only combine expertise in one area, but they understand at least 3 areas of expertise, and therefore they're able to generate ideas. They call them idea babies that other people can't generate, because you have depth and breadth, right? Now, that makes it powerful, because if you only have expertise in one field, talking to somebody else with expertise in another field, what happens is you start to condense your knowledge, so it becomes very, very shallow, so you can talk to each other, because the other person doesn't know what you're talking about. Whereas here, if you're able to combine engineering with software development with design, now you're in a whole different realm. I mean, just think about a printer. So if you had 3 colors versus 2 colors, your number of variations is not like 1x, it's like 100x, right? And the same thing happens when you understand different expertise. So if you want to say, okay, how are we future-proofing? We're not only doing it on the digital side in a very methodical way, but we're trying to ensure that whoever we hire can be reskilled or come with other skills, and we understand each other's workspace into the future.
Okay, thanks, Fernando. How many of you here today, especially those who work for corporates, are able to approve your leave on your cell phone? Okay, let's see, show of hand. Okay. How many of you are on the following 3 apps, which is WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram. Okay. All right. So, Frendo mentioned a very important point, that technology is also about lifestyle. And he said something which is quite powerful that I'm quite passionate about, which is transforming the employee experience transforming the customer experience begins with transforming the employee experience, because your employees actually represent the very segment that you're trying to serve. So I have 3 parts to my discussion with you today. One of those is around what is the strategic thrust from a people point of view that drives us to be able to think about technology in a real way. And the second is, what are some of those key drivers that Frendo was talking about that we are concerned about, that we think about from a human capital point of view, that are likely to really change businesses, but also change and shift the skills that employees actually bring to the workplace. And then finally, I'll talk about 3 key examples around what does it mean for us in the human capital space when we talk about technology in a real way, around issues to do with learning and how we bring in new people. The example that Frendo mentioned around, when you bring new people, you're no longer bringing the classical, be a commerce student, an engineering student, but you're looking for a hybrid of skills. Similarly to him, I actually trained here at WITS as a psychologist, and I've ended up in human capital or traditional HR. In fact, trained clinically for that meta-native in industrial, and I've ended up in HR. So it's really about what are some of the multiple skills that you need that will drive and propel your business forward. So let's start talking about the customer. Customer being the employee who has needs, like we actually have in business. And Frendo mentioned a very important point, because for us, a customer could be an individual with different life segments, could also be a corporate with different life stages and different needs. But we also know that the individual customer is becoming increasingly complex. They want to be able to work on multiple devices at the same time, so does the employee. They want to be able to hold multiple products, so does the employee. They want advice and help when they need it, so does the employee. And therefore, it is important that when we begin to frame and think about technology and digital world, we're thinking about the employee as the customer. The second part is around the world is changing. There's so many dynamics. We're working in a world where employees are also citizens. Customers are also citizens. And therefore, there is a fine line with technology as well. So how do you make sure that you're implementing these strategies in a responsible way, so that employees are able to understand and appreciate that they can participate in different platforms, because you can imagine the experience with customers. When a customer is not happy, you're on Twitter, you're on Instagram immediately, and your reputation is at risk. So that's kind of the context of the customer within which we're constantly finding ourselves. And therefore, whilst we're balancing the need for technology and the digital or the phygital environment, and as customers need new experiences, the experience economy, how are we responding to making sure that we're creating the necessary structures to be able to make sure that employees also continue to thrive in an environment that is embracing technology, but also in a responsible manner. So what are the key drivers around technology that we're responding to in the human capital space? The 5 key things. One, we know that, and Frendo spoke about transactors, it could be traders, people who are really at the front end of really providing advice. What frameworks and tools do they need? But also, when we make the shifts, what training do people need in terms of multi-skilling, in terms of new roles? Because if you're implementing a new technology, chances are you'll actually have a new capability. And your capability, everybody's doing the same thing around the ease of advice. But it's something that a competitor cannot be able to copy. And therefore, that capability becomes important, because it could become a business unit, it could also become a role, it could also become skills that people need for the future going forward. The second key driver is around service experience. Simplifying and improving the customer experience is something that all those in the service industry or in financial services are quite concerned about. And therefore, what does it mean to improve the customer experience? It means having a single view of the customer, because most of us are on those apps. How many of us are on apps, actually, able to transact on apps? Can I see? Show of hands. That's exactly it. Single view of the customer, translated into something that really makes sense. So does the employee. How do we make sure that the employee has a single view of their pay, retirement, of their learning and development, of their leave, and a range of other things that they may need? The third component is around platforms and products, depending on which side of the business you're on, the innovation that's required. We know there's disruptors out there. So for us, our job is to constantly scout people who bring the innovation in terms of new skills as we're bringing them into the organization. People who think differently from us. For example, I don't know how many of you know about the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum has a group of people who are some of the bright thinkers in the world. And they get together every year, Young Global Shapers Program, I think it's called. And those are some of the people that you want to partner with and be able to tap into them as a pool of community of people with the skills that you need that bring the innovation and the thinking and totally disrupt the way you actually do business. The fourth element I want to talk about is around how we manage money, money in and money out. Foundation of that is technology. So what skills are needed to be able to assist us in being able to do that? And finally, it really is about IT in its architecture, as Frendo has spoken about. What skills do we need to be able to take us forward? So what does it mean for us as RMB? Let's talk about the first one, which is around the acquisition of skills. In fact, we're right in the throes of debating and thinking through what are the skills we need for today and the skills we need for tomorrow and the emerging skills. And that can vary from functional skills to just behavioral skills. We know that leadership skills haven't changed for the last 40 years, according to research by CEB. But what really concerns us are those functional and technical skills that we need to continue to look out for. So the type of graduates, when we bring them into the workplace, we run a winter school, which is starting, I believe, next week. And there, we're trying to really look out for those people who stand out, who are able to, we can integrate them into our business, and they can be able to take us forward, certainly from a delivery point of view. And then the second issue I'd like to address is learning and development. Frendo spoke about mobile. We're keen on looking at people are learning on their apps, they're learning on their laptops, so learning on the go. The days of classroom training, as we know in terms of research, are kind of shrinking, and therefore that philosophy around making sure that people are learning 70% on the job, therefore what technology do they have to be able to interact? So if you're learning and you have somebody on the other side of the screen being able to skill you and train you, even though it's like Siri, those of you who use iPhone. When Siri talks back at you, the same thing with technology around making sure that the e-learning solutions, the mobile learning solutions that we put in place are helping people think through about skills they need for today and tomorrow. And then the final example I'd like to talk about, given the pressure around time, is around the employee experience. The employee experience and employee engagement, it really is about when you come into the workplace. Something as simple as your card. That access card must be able to do multiple things for you. Whether it's access, whether it's buying you food, or whether it's doing other amazing things. Hopefully in future, as we partner with Frendo and Reshni, we'll be going into these guys, thumbprints, to be able to, just with your thumbprint, you can be able to move around the building and be able to do some interesting things. The second is around a single view of the employee experience. For us, a real effort is around getting the basics right, because you can't really leapfrog the business in terms of technology without really sorting out some of the technology infrastructure challenges when learning is not talking to the employee record. So when Frendo and Reshni are asking us who in the business has skills in supply chain, who has experience in engineering, we want to be able to pull that information in a quick and easy way to be able to make informed decisions for the business. And then finally, it's about ongoing engagement, real-time feedback, the technology that we're putting in, because guess what? Not all of us want to wait until the end of the year before bonus time to actually get feedback. You want it real-time, here and now, so as you can shift behavior. And remember, we're working with the majority of our workforce is actually millennials as well. And therefore, we need to respond. They have that need for ongoing and constant feedback. And therefore, that real-time feedback solution as technology enables us to be able to create an opportunity for people to improve on their performance. We are a high-performance environment, and therefore, people get feedback immediately on the spot to be able to shift behavior and to be able to improve on delivery. So that's the story around the human capital journey, responding to some of the changes we're seeing in business, and I'll hand over to Rashni to take us through some of the other side of technology.
Thank you, Sia. Just going to skip through to the visuals. I think
Skip.
it should land on open 24/7, I think.
Skip,
Okay,
skip.
carry on.
I've spoken to this. Good.
Okay, you can pause.
Good.
So I'm going to start with the fourth industrial revolution. We're finding ourselves in the era of the cyber-physical system, which I personally love. So we've got smart robotics, we've got the driverless cars, we've got entire manufacturing processes organized around 3D printing. And we've also got an era of the prosumer, so consumers that are highly empowered because they have access to products and assets and services that were previously restricted to them. In this era, the consumer is demanding that we be available 24/7 with global connectivity and an ability to offer services that are unprecedented. So how do we future-proof business today leveraging technology? And the answer is hopefully not starting with technology. It starts with collaboration across vertical and horizontal silos to ensure that we can get to a cohesive digital strategy. The cohesive digital strategy will allow us to make the right technology choices, technology that can then span the entire organization and right fit that strategy. Once that strategy is in place, the next step is to look at partnership. And partnership here is twofold. So the first piece that I'm going to talk about is the partnership between business and technology. This is critically important. All digital solutions are built for people in business, but enabled by IT. So if technology and business are disconnected, we will find that the usability, the consumption of that technology becomes restricted and limited, and can actually place the business at risk because it starts to disconnect from what your customer actually wants. The second partnership is that with IT vendors or IT partners in the landscape that we're facing at the moment. It is very easy to become enamored with the bright, shiny, new innovations, the new technologies. The key to future-proofing is long-term thinking. It is about being aware of the practical implications of technology adoption, and most importantly, it's about partnering with mature providers that have some experience with implementing some of the technology that you're facing today. This partnership will bring to bear a lot of experience and will start to insulate your organization from the risk of net new technologies that have not seen fruition. So the digital workforce. IT providers have taken 2 decades of technologies around screen scraping, around algorithms, around business rules, around macros, and they've packaged it into a nifty term, and the term is robotics. But robotics is actually software that can be configured to perform routine, repetitive tasks, which humans currently perform. In this way, we say that they mimic the actions of humans. They can also be programmed with simple to complex algorithms, which when applied on large volumes of credible data, can assist humans in thinking and in making certain decisions. The digital workforce is arriving at a point in time where the workforce itself is starting to evolve. The workforce of today, the new generation of workforce, are not interested in deep functional specialization, in jobs for life, in task orientation. Armed with a transdisciplinary capability, they're actually looking for breadth of experience. Breadth of experience offered to them by moving from role to role in relatively rapid succession, either in the same organization or across multiple organizations. So these are our millennials and beyond millennials. The digital workforce allows organizations to be able to fill the gap around functional specialization and around task execution, freeing up their human counterparts to be able to focus on creative activities, on innovativeness, and also, most importantly, on client engagement. Recent surveys conducted in the US indicated that just over 40% of human workers are feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of information they need to process, given this globally connected 24/7 era. And what machines do is they alleviate this burden. Alleviate the burden so that human counterparts can make sense of the outcomes and start to think and innovate creatively. I often say that the greatest gift that machines are offering us today is that they make humans more human. So interoperability, something that consumers are demanding today. So all our highly empowered consumers, they want to be able to access the products and services of organizations, but through channels of their choice. IoT firms recently conducted a survey on internet users, and that survey said that 71% of internet users abandon applications because they feel that the ease of operability is simply not suitable for them. So critical is making data streamlined, centralizing it, and also streamlining your processes so that they can be made accessible through multiple channels. We've seen in Europe that banks are facing new regulation that requires them to make their data available through APIs, meaning that banks will become core platform providers, but the distribution will take place elsewhere. So whether the pressure is from customer or the pressure is from regulation, the need is for a greater degree of connectivity, accessibility to streamlined structured data, and simple processes that allow for ease of use and adoption. UX, i.e. user experience, is equally, if not more important than UI, being the user interface. And this is where the partnership between technology and business becomes exceptionally critical. Designing for customer and customer experience is infinitely more important than the technology that we can see in the playing field at the moment. The last point is around flexibility. So the one thing that is very certain is change. Change is inevitable and change is absolutely certain. The flexibility that is required is more on technology and on people. It's not sufficient for us to have structured architecture, core platforms that can evolve with time. IT solutions need to be modular, needs to be flexible so that it can adapt with the required changes. So things like cloud solutions, software as a service is being leveraged by a number of organizations to enable that flexibility. Lastly, it's the flexibility of your workforce. Their ability to be flexible and adaptable is critical for the future. It is the workforce that embraces the future with curiosity as opposed to fear that will give us the ability to get into the era of singularity. Thank you.
So I'm going to cheat. I have a question around the digital experience. What part of this is lived already? So what part of the HR, the human capital interface is lived? What part of what you're doing is lived already?
So from a robotics perspective, we've onboarded mature technology, but technology that is rapidly configurable. And we work with our employees, we work with our line managers, and we almost place the robot side by side with the employee so that they can see how it works and they can see how the nature of their work is transcending and changing. And we've placed a lot of emphasis on designing the work of the future, designing the workforce of the future to enable that collaboration between man and machine. I know Sia can speak to some of the HR pieces that support that.
Thanks, Rashni.
Okay, great. So some of the practical examples around technology is around looking at employee needs and how they work. So in terms of technology, we have Skype for Business, which means that even if you're outside of the office, you can be able to connect and be able to work. We are introducing and embracing dynamic working, which is around flexi time. Employees have needs, and therefore it's important to be able to look at getting the best out of employees and creating a dynamic working environment. And therefore you need the virtual tools that allow you to be able to connect and be able to work and do what you need to do virtually as well. But it also means that we're also multi-skilling employees in cases where we are automating certain functions and therefore looking for opportunities where we can multi-skill employees. We spoke about transdisciplinary skills, and therefore that presents an opportunity for employees to actually learn new ways of doing things. And especially when you shift from one system to another, it means that now you're working with a single view of the customer through multiple systems or through one system that allows you to be able to play.
Thank you. Other questions for R&B for the second part of the R&B story share? I have another question. What has been the impact? So how have employees received this? Are you doing it on their behalf? Are they partnering with you? Are they excited about it? Are you dragging them along? What's the employee experience?
Maybe I can take this one. So I think there's been a few fundamental shifts in how we're approaching the sector, right? So the first thing is we've actually brought business to the table. So it's not kind of technology leading the pack. It's actually business requirements leading the pack. So there's a saying that what you don't want to do is you don't want to solve a problem nobody has with technology nobody wants, right? And I think the old version of that is you're walking around with a hammer looking for a nail, right? So we see a lot of that. It's like, hey, do you want some blockchain? Do you want some AI? Do you want some this? But it's more saying, okay, well, what is going to add value to employees' lives on a daily basis? Now, who wouldn't want that, right? So it's very clear that what you need to do is you need to understand who is your client, who is your customer, and are you solving a customer problem? So if you are doing that, and the way we approach that is we design mock-ups of how things are going to work with the flows. We'll bring in, let's say, like the user, the end user, and say, listen, would this add value to you? Or does this make sense? Would you add something else, right? So what's also important is we're not starting with a base of zero. So like I myself used to be a transactor for the better part of a decade. And so you start with something that should be 85, 90% there. So when the person sees it, there's an immediate emotional response. It's like, okay, this is going to work, right? And then can you add this? Can you add that? So are we bringing people along? Are we dragging them? I think it depends on the area, but most of it is sort of like we are bringing them along.
Thank you. Thanks
And
very much.
maybe if I can add to that, I mean, I think change is hard anywhere, anytime. And therefore, there is the acknowledgement that, change will always be hard, but what do we put in place to make sure that change is a lot more tolerable and easier to adopt? And as Frendo mentioned, it starts with what is the end goal? What are we trying to do for the customer? Because it's the reason why we're in business, it's the reason why we exist. It starts off with what benefits does it actually have for the customer? But then also, what benefits does it have for the employee in terms of multi-skilling, new roles, etc., which is sometimes harder, but with time. We engage and we invest in a lot of leadership development programs to make sure that we have a credible leadership to address some of those questions as they emerge.
Ashley, you had a question.
One of the things that I found very impressive around RFP is around the fact that you've got bots and employee numbers in HR that are doing the process. I think it was 2 weeks. The bot does it in 2 days or something. You need to go to the loo, doesn't take us a day. I think that's quite significant in our space. Can you just share a little bit of how you think about the bot process and the fact that there isn't employment and stuff?
Okay, so the robotics that you're talking about is software. So we don't have a physical bot that we place on the seat with equipment. Not yet. But if you look at an integrated workforce where humans are partnered with machines, it is important that they become part of the working ecosystem. And this is why we give them an employee ID. That employee ID also manages access to specific processes as well as specific technologies. Being in the banking industry, we manage risk very well. So that allows us to keep the ecosystem intact. We then go about configuring the software to perform exactly what a human does. Now, the human world is not ones and zeros, the machine's world is. So very often what comes out is a lot of exceptions initially, but those exceptions tell us where we actually inadvertently break processes. And it allows us to continuously improve until we get to a point of where it took a human 2 weeks, it's now taking a bot under an hour. So the return on investment on the technologies we're talking about is in excess of 300%. But the proviso is that you select the correct processes to automate. And the proviso is that you configure it together with people that are able to impart their knowledge on how they've been operating those processes in our ecosystem.
Thank you. Thank you, Rashni. Thank you, Frendo. Thank you, Sia. Is there...
Just one more question.
No, go ahead. I'll take it. Yeah.
So one of the greatest pushbacks against augmented workforce in South Africa is the fact that socially we have a high unemployment rate. So 27% unemployment, expanded definition is even higher, 37% and so on. And there's been a greatest pushback. Do you think at IMB you would have automated a little bit more if you didn't fear that there was going to be a backlash?
It's a very good question. So here's a, and I think we're very conscious of the dynamics around social issues, and hence we invest in the graduate development program, we invest in youth development, we invest in winter schools to really be part of the conversation around how do we create employability of our youth. So that's an ethos that exists in our philosophy as a business. The second part to that is everything that is being done, automation, technology, is happening within a broader ecosystem, and therefore we have controls in place around at what point do you automate, what are the impacts, how do you reskill your workforce to actually do exactly that, to understand the impacts and be able to have smart decisions around redeployment. Fortunately for us, because we're working for a big group, and therefore there are opportunities to be able to share with the sister companies within the broader group, but there are also opportunities to be able to multi-skill people where possible. So we're very conscious, especially on that particular issue, around the impact of automation on unemployment.
But if I can just add to that, right? We were actually talking about this outside during the break, and the example we came up with is like, when there's roadworks happening in Sandton or wherever you work, and then sometimes they hire a person with a red flag, and then like, this is the job, right? And then you look at that and you say, okay, but you're not gaining any skills from that job. Okay, you have some base level of income, and that might, sort of subsidize your living. But what you're not doing is you're not creating an opportunity for that person to grow, right? And that's an issue, because that person will never be able to break out of that cycle. So I think, we said there's a difference between creating a job and like having a job, like creating a job with a future where you can learn and you can get paid not only in rands, but also get paid in experience and skills is vastly different, and it's much more difficult to do, right? And I think a prime example of where technology has done that well, where it's actually an opportunity, is Uber. So Uber is a fantastic example where you have somebody who, let's say, used to be a domestic worker in Cape Town. I actually met a lady there. Her friend got her a car, so now she's driving this car. She drove for 2 years, and now she has her own car, right? The level of income goes from 3,000 to over 10,000 a month. It's dramatically different. Once she pays off that car, then it increases 20,000 a month, then she can get out of the cycle, right? So what we're trying to say here is, like, the first thing you need to do is you need to break the decentralization of information in just like a few highly skilled individuals. You make that a corporate IP, and you use that to train staff so that actually everyone has a better playing field, a better chance of being successful. And that's how you sort of like retrain people. When you're talking about automation, right, people say, oh, but like unemployment rate's so high, how can you take away jobs and still automate things? So I just came back from Japan about 2-3 months ago. And Japan, when they dig a railroad, right, they section each part of that road into 3-meter cubes. And there's one supervisor looking after 3 cubes, and they just have a machine digging. There's not a spade in Japan, right? It's like a hydraulic machine digging, and then a supervisor guarding it, because it's very hard to dig 100 kilometers straight but it's very easy to dig 9 cubic meters straight. And if you messed up, we know it was that person in that cube, right? But yet their unemployment rate is like less than 2%. So how does that work, right? So like we mustn't rely on saying, okay, only sort of like low-level subsistence skills can generate employment. We must think about how do we leverage technology to upskill people so they can generate more, it's like more opportunities, more employment, more income.
Thank you. Just because I like you, Myron. Go ahead.
So, the example of the analytics machine, I think it's also important for us to educate our people on, yes, the physical job of digging has been taken away, but now there's a new skill required to service a robot or to do an oil change. So it's not that jobs are being taken away, it's that the skill requirement is changing for the jobs.
If I can quickly just share, in a year that we've been looking at robotics, just year and a plus in RMB, what we have seen happening to people that used to occupy the job of just punching data from one system to the other is we've retrained them to actually program bots. And if you look at the market now, robotics developers, the salary is actually doubling. And every time you go to market, it is a double on the figures again. The other aspect that we're seeing actually materialize is managing the bots, managing the exceptions, and then lastly, engaging with client. So we moved a large section of our workforce that were punching data between systems into client advisory services. And the entire client value add of that process just changes. So it truly is an opportunity for more as opposed to take from one and sort of add to the other.
May I just add some color to that as well? I mean, it's also people working in project worlds. The traditional ways of skilling people by going to classroom is no longer sufficient. In fact, the more you expose people in working in projects, you're actually multi-skilling people because they get to understand the different parts of the value chain. So it really is important to shift, even with when there's a new project coming up, put your people together. Make sure they're part of that project because by the end of it, they've actually learned a new skill, not only in project management, but also a new functional skills. So that's kind of practical how you keep refreshing. And I will say, we probably could do more around curriculum refresh and making sure that we stay relevant.
Thank you. Thank you, Frando. Thank you, Sia. Thank you, Rashni. Very interesting.